The equipment are microscope with magnification of 400 times, a blender, a vacuum pump, Kitasato flask, and a polycarbonate filter holder. The test materials are 2 liters beaker, 1 liter beaker, glass slides. 3 sieves will be used to filter the samples. A sieve with 1 mm mesh. A sieve with 0.25 mm mesh. And a sieve with 45 micrometer mesh. The cellulose nitrate membranes will be necessary to retain the hyphae of the samples for later evaluation. And the almond oil. In addition to these materials, you will also need flasks with cap and spatula or spoon. 3 subsamples of 10 grams of previously homogenized soil are collected per each experimental unit. The first subsample is used to determine the soil moisture. The second one is used to measure hyphae extra-radicular length. The third should be stored at -20 degrees Celsius to use only if further measurements are needed. Remember, the samples must be identified. The 10 grams of soil from the previously measured subsample are introduced in a 1 liter beaker with 500 milliliters of tap water and vigorously stirred with a glass slide for 30 seconds. And then left to settle down for 1 minute. After the waiting time, the suspension is sieved through stacked sieves of 1 mm, the top sieve, and 0.25 mm, the bottom sieve. These steps should be repeated twice after the supernatant is discarded to reach a total sieved tap water volume of about 1,500 milliliters in a 2 liters beaker. After this process you will have a volume of 1,500 milliliters, and you can move on. The sieved tap water should be stirred for 30 seconds in a blender at the lowest speed. After stirring, the sieved tap water is left to settle down for 2 minutes. And 500 milliliters of the supernatant are collected. Then, this volume is sieved in a 45 micrometers sieve. The material retained on this 45 micrometers sieve is collected, with the help of distilled water, in a flask. Before initiate the process, a square of 8 per 8 grid should be marked in the membranes with a pen to facilitate the subsequent measurements. The material collected in the flask are placed above a cellulose nitrate membrane inside the filtration compartment of the vacuum pump. The tap water is then filtered by the vacuum pump, and the remaining material, retained on the membrane, composed of soil residue, mycelium, and other particles, is submitted to evaluation. For the measurement of the total extra-radicular mycelium length, the membrane, with the sample, is air-dried for a few hours and placed on a 5 per 5 centimeters glass slide and lubricated with a drop of almond oil to improve its visualization at the microscope. To proceed with the quantification, one of the microscope's ocular lenses must be equipped with a 10 per 10 grid known as eyepiece Whipple disc. Now, you have to count the number of intersections of the hyphae with horizontal and vertical lines of the eyepiece Whipple disc grid. When you look through the microscope lens, you will see the membrane and you'll position the eyepiece grid in the top right corner of each square of the membrane. Inside the ocular grid, you will count the intersections of the hyphae with the horizontal and vertical lines. For example, in the image, you can see the ocular grid in the second square of membrane grid and a hyphae crossing the lines. When the hyphae cross exactly between the corner of two squares, you must count only one intersection. The goal is count all intersections. The total number of intersections counted in the second square of the membrane grid was 17. The total number of intersections must be counted for all 64 squares marked out on the membrane grid. Be careful by not confusing root hairs or other membrane marks with a hyphae. As a suggestion, you can use counters to record the number of squares and the total number of intersections to make your work easier.